Just again, apologies for Eddie. He was supposed to give the opening speech, so anybody who's disappointed, he will be here in the afternoon. He'll close out the conference with the usual panache that you would expect from Eddie. I'm going to come back later in this session to actually deliver the presentation I was originally scheduled to give, but I'm actually in Eddie's stead. I'm going to give the opening speech for the conference as well. So if you bear with me on that, I'll do a shuffle between the two functions here today. Firstly, again, just to echo the thanks to everybody who supported us here, Offaly County Council and Peter for opening the event here today. We're very, very much appreciative of your support. KPMG, SEAI, Intertrade Ireland have been very strong in their support for the conference as well, and we thank them very much for that. The Energy Ireland team, who've suffered long and hard to get us this far as well, and then within Mainstream, particularly my good friend and colleague here, Joe Corbett, who really is the guy responsible for pulling the logistics of all this together on behalf of Mainstream. It's been a tremendous effort from Joe and the team. So to the business of the day, the energy market in Europe and indeed the world is undergoing profound change. Europe, in common with the rest of the world, is moving away from oil, gas and coal to the generation of electricity from renewable and sustainable sources of energy like wind, solar and biomass. Fossil fuel subsidies worldwide in 2011 were over $500 billion US. This can't continue. People think renewables is a subsidized industry. It's not the only fuel source that's subsidized. The transition from fossil fuels to renewables has to be and will be completed over the next 40 years. The IEA, the International Energy Agency in Paris, publishes the World Energy Outlook. It's the Bible for energy worldwide, for governments, investors, etc., etc. It states that in the period 2013 to 2035, there will be a 70% increase in the global demand for electricity. 50% of this increase will be coming from renewable sources. Renewables are now becoming and will be the dominant technology in power generation as we move out to 2035. Already, we have binding European Union targets for the use of renewables by 2020. As we meet here today, the EU is discussing even bigger targets for 2030. There was a major debate on these targets in Dublin last week, in Dublin Castle under the Irish presidency. Great progress was reported. The targets will be increased each decade until fossil fuels are completely replaced by renewables like wind by 2050. This move towards renewables presents Ireland with a unique economic opportunity. This arises because of the current particular circumstances in the United Kingdom, and Peter referred to that earlier. They have binding renewable targets like Ireland under EU law and like the rest of Europe. But additionally, the UK has enshrined these targets in its own legislation, and it's unique in Europe in that. So it's not just European law, it's UK law that they must meet these renewable targets. At the end of 2010, the UK had a total installed capacity of 83 gigawatts of electricity generation. The peak demand in the UK was 61 gigawatts. Sounds like they have an excess there that can cope with demand into the future. However, there is a risk of security of supply in the UK because about 15 gigawatts of existing capacity will close in the next decade, by the end of this decade, because of the Large Combustion Plant Directive. So 15 gigawatts of coal plant will close in the next few years in the UK. 10% of those have already closed this year. I'd like to quote directly from the Department of Energy and Climate Change report on electricity market reform. Our analysis suggests that the capacity margins will tighten significantly over the second half of this decade. Credible scenarios suggest the problem could occur towards the middle of this decade. If we don't act, a central scenario we have modeled suggests that in some years we could see blackouts affecting up to 2.5 million homes. So that's a measure of the potential crisis in the UK. Alistair Buchanan, the regulator in the UK, made a very public statement about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and I'll quote from Buchanan. Things are going to be very tight in 3 years' time in Britain. 10% of Britain's generation stock will retire over the next month. That will have an effect on the reserve margins, which will dip to alarmingly low levels, according to Ofgem projections. These margins will drop from a current 15% to less than 5% as we go into the period 2017 to 2020. Also, much of the UK's nuclear fleet is due to decommission due to its age in the next few years. It will take years to replace the nuclear plants, maybe a decade, and probably longer. Maybe they won't even be replaced. Time will tell. The combination of these factors will lead to a power crisis in Britain at the end of this decade. There will be a shortage of generation capacity over the 4 years at the end, and it will last for some years beyond that. And that's the opportunity for large-scale renewables to be brought on. This provides Ireland with a unique opportunity, which was first detected by the British Prime Minister. Britain will have a shortage of renewable electricity in the latter part of this decade. On the other hand, I think as everybody here knows and we'll show today, Ireland has an excess of renewable resources. At the British-Irish Council Summit in July 2011, the governments announced that we would jointly work to make large-scale renewable export from Ireland a reality. This became a reality when Pat Rabbitte and the Secretary of State, Ed Davey, signed a Memorandum of Understanding on the exports of renewable power from Ireland to the UK in January of this year. The two governments in turn, after signing the Memorandum of Understanding, agreed to put a task force together to enter into a full-blown intergovernmental agreement to put this on a legal standing between the UK and Ireland by the end of this year. I've met both teams here in Ireland and the UK in the last few weeks, and I think the work on the intergovernmental agreement is progressing at a very rapid pace. There's a huge commitment both in Dublin and London to this. So let me emphasise that a great deal of negotiation remains to be done by both these teams. Nothing is definite as of now, nothing is agreed, but it is reasonable to anticipate that agreement will be reached between the two governments and that a new export market will be opened up for Ireland at the end of this year. It will be then up to the country and everybody in this room to make hay from this opportunity. But to do so, we have to start to supply green electricity to the UK in the period 2017-2018. That's not far away in the context of the scale of this project. So we need to be clear about a few things. Firstly, Ireland has enough wind to generate more than 10 times the domestic electricity demand. We have much more than we need for ourselves. The closest analogy I think we can think of is agriculture here in Ireland. We use grass to produce 10 times what we need in Ireland in terms of meat and dairy produce. We export the surplus production, and it brings 8 billion of exports into the economy of Ireland and employs over 100,000 people. We can take the same approach with electricity exports. The second point is that the technology exists. Wind speeds in the Midlands are low relative to the west coast of Ireland, but they're high compared to continental Europe. The technologies are there now with wind turbines to really efficiently export low cost of energy product to the UK. And thirdly, the electricity generated here in the Midlands will need to be competitive, and it's up to the supply chain to help it make it be as competitive as possible. We have that advantage, we have the wind, we have it at scale, but we must be a low-cost producer, and that is our competitive advantage. All this suggests that Ireland and Britain are in a win-win situation. Britain will need to import a large amount of electricity at the end of this decade. The figure being talked about is 5 gigawatts. This is a large export market by any standards. The construction of 5 gigawatts of onshore wind is about an investment of 7.5 billion euros. So that's the opportunity for the supply chain. It will create thousands of direct jobs in construction and thousands more in indirect jobs here. For the longer term, experience tells us that the market of this size will attract suppliers of towers, blades, other auxiliary equipment and ancillary equipment. Additionally, in the long term, there will be the provision of long-term maintenance services as well as these manufacturing jobs. And that's why we're here today. We're here to identify the business opportunities for the Midlands. We want to see if we can attract companies to set up operations here and to see if existing companies can be encouraged to expand and explore possibilities with major foreign manufacturers to work here together. So direct jobs at Tier 1 companies and all the knock-on effects right through the supply chain for local business, and not just manufacturing business. It's everybody from hotels, someone who'll sell you a newspaper, every service you can imagine. Industry at this scale will have an effect on every business in this community. It's early days, nothing is guaranteed, but if the two governments reach agreement and really produce something substantive in the intergovernmental agreement, this project will open up at a rapid pace and give huge advantages to the Midlands here. in Offaly and beyond. For that reason, it makes sense to do a lot of preparation in advance. This is why we want to put the necessary information out into the market and why we want to encourage networking of the local business community here with the international business community that we have brought here today. Other issues of which we've seen, there are protesters out here today. They have a voice, they will be listened to, but that's not what we're here today for. We're here to talk about the supply chain and the business opportunities and have a very focused and intense day on that. These are some of the possibilities, huge opportunities for employment during the construction and pre-construction phases. Clearly opportunities for manufacturing, and we have over 20 exhibitors. Some of the biggest players in this sector in the world are here today from Europe, North America, China, and local players here from Ireland. Opportunities during the long-term operations and maintenance. This is a 20, 30, 40-year project. And it's not just directly in the wind turbines, the wind farms themselves, the broader opportunities for indirect employment. Our colleagues are here from LM, the biggest blade manufacturer in the world. A facility, if they build one here, would employ 300 people. The indirect jobs would be further 500. So there's huge potential outside the direct investment for indirect jobs. As Peter said earlier, this is a community rich in energy history. You know, you go back a few years ago and the three biggest producers of peat in the world were Russia, Ireland and Finland in that order. That peat, I can remember, and I'm old enough to have worked in Rode and Furban and Allenwood. And a lot of people here remember those stations. And then the new fluidized bed technology stations. We're moving from what would be now considered non-green, dirty fuels, if you want to put it like that, into a new era of energy here in the Midlands. The skill bases are here. It's a huge opportunity to move from peat and the generation from peat to harvesting the other natural resource here. I hope we'll have a really fantastic interactive day. I think we have some very strong panels here. As Paul said, we're going to keep the panels as tight as possible in terms of presentations to get lots of interaction with the audience here. And I hope we get lots of questions and then lots of interaction as well with the exhibitors outside. Thank you very much.